Hey, Farshad.
Hey, Dominic, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Doing very well. Had a busy day, but do good.
Hey, thanks for joining us here today. Having you on a podcast is kind of a special treat because business owners don't often get to talk to a guy like you. You're usually way up in a tower in some major city looking after all of our debit card info.
Right.
That sounds scary?
Well, yeah, it was actually when I first sort of got my first full time gig in this field. I was quite scared. It was I've been in IT. I'd been in IT at that point for at least a dozen years, and I ended up working at HSBC, and which is world at the time world's largest bank, and my position was to deal with their internet banking security, building a secure internet banking platform. And I went to my manager, I think it was the first week, and I thought, wow, I feel this is a huge responsibility. Like, we're building this thing, and I have to make sure that this everyone's going to hack this. I mean, the classic example for hacking something is the bank.
Yeah.
And I have to make sure that this doesn't have any problems. And and he said, yeah, but it'll wear off like once you work here for a while. And he was right. I was there for 9 years, and by the end, you're dealing with one of the world's most critical systems. So these systems are moving money for some of the world's largest enterprises between countries, and when you think about it, it scares you. But after working there day to day for a while, it's just the way it is. You're doing your job. And so yeah, it's an interesting field.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, and I know you know this, but I'll repeat it for the sake of the podcast because people are listening to this as an audio, or they might be watching the YouTube on video, the video on YouTube. But I interview industry experts who business owners don't normally get to hear. This is kind of the inside scoop on running a business. The business owners who listen just happen to be architectural woodworkers, cabinet makers. They make windows and doors. They might make gaming tables or coffins. Like anything out of wood that's beautiful, the people listening to this make or distribute. So it's an interesting group, but it's all business owners.
Yep.
And I brought you on today to talk to something that scares all of us to our boots, which is scams, hacking, and all that evil stuff that happens that could potentially shut us down. So I'm so happy that I met you and that you're willing to come on the show, because none of us would normally have a chance to talk to a guy like you about scams and hacking, etc.
Yeah, it's important. It's important to. You're absolutely right, because usually these conversations happen within certain industries, particularly in regulated industries. Like most people that are outside that, if there's no regulation that requires them to do X, Y, Z, a lot of people aren't even thinking about security until it happens to them. And I've had, and also just the general public, they're not really security aware or security minded. So I've done, presentations like this to community groups where it's like, these are typical things that should be aware in terms of general security user awareness and that kind of thing. So
Yeah. Well, let's break it down a little bit. You and I did some pre-work on this. Let's break it down a little bit and first talk about scams. The scams that hit business owners and really, stop us in our tracks. One of the things that happened to one of my clients a little while ago was they had something called ransomware.
Mm-hmm.
Ransomware. So maybe instead of me explaining it, can you tell us what ransomware is and talk about what to do if it happens to you and how to avoid it, how to be aware of it?
Yeah, ransomware is an interesting one. It's funny because in the old days, everything was a virus, right? Like, back in when I started using computers, like, you get a virus, and then viruses got complicated. There was different kinds. There was worms and this and Trojans, and then they're like, well, there's too many words to describe these bad things. Let's call them malware, right? It's anything that has malicious intent or software that does bad stuff. So ransomware is the type of malicious software, but really what it does is it just holds you for ransom, right? Like the name basically explains it. It's what it does is they typically will take some important files on your computer, whether it's all your pictures or it could be your business files, all the spreadsheets that you're using to keep track of all the cabinets that you've made, or whatever it may be. They'll just encrypt it, and if they encrypt it, it's like locking it. And it's, imagine if you had a bunch of pile of paper, a bunch of your important wood in a room, and then someone came and locked it, took the keys away.
Right.
You're not going to be able to get to your material, right? So that's what the idea is. Like, they take the key, they have the key, and then if you want that key, you're going to have to pay them. And it's typically, they'll ask for cryptocurrency. So that's why they categorize this as like a crypto malware, because they're like, hey, give us a crypto Bitcoin. And, and so the problem is that Bitcoins are pretty expensive these days, and they're not easily accessible. So imagine if you're a business owner and you wake up and all of a sudden all your Excel files that you had on that hard drive that was keeping track of all your inventory is all locked up, and you can't get to them while you may not be able to operate your business. So where are you going to get Bitcoin? That's the number one. How are you going to get it? How quickly are you going to get it? It's not many of us have that ready to go. So you have to find an agent and go pay them and then transfer it. Even that kind of stuff is not easy. So it starts to get pretty complicated, and it's hurt a lot of businesses, but not only businesses. There were a number of city agencies. I think it was one in the UK. There was
Hospitals.
Hospitals. Yeah. There was a government agency in the US. Companies have had to shut down because they couldn't afford the Bitcoin, and they literally went out of business. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
Now that we've scared the heck out of everybody about this cryptocurrency thing, and then you mentioned agents. What do I do if I'm a business owner? How do I protect myself first? And then if it happens, how do I get out of the situation?
Yeah, so protection, it's interesting because, you're like, big businesses, they buy all this fancy, malware detection software and all these things, and it helps them. And the small guys don't have access to it, et cetera, et cetera. But even the big businesses, all the technical controls they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on, they don't really help them at the end of the day. They still end up getting the same problems. And I can't remember which industry paper I was reading, but they were saying the number one attack vector, or the number one security problem, is the human factor. So you can go put all of these controls and buy all these servers and all these other things, but if the user clicks on the wrong thing and they open up the wrong email, all that stuff goes out the window. And that it applies to small business, it applies to big business, it applies to everything. It applies to you and me. I've been subject to that kind of stuff. Whereas I have a busy day, and then I was target to a spear phishing attack. Now, spear phishing, I'll just sort of
these words, Farshad, I can't keep track of the words. Now we've got spear phishing.
I'll just, I guess, for the sake of the discussion, I'll explain both phishing and spear phishing. Phishing, which I hope some people are familiar with, essentially refers to the concept where the attacker, it's just like phishing, like when you go with fishing rod and all that stuff, right? But they use, instead of a F, they use the PH to make it cool and hacker-like. And essentially what they do is they phish you. They phish humans. And what's the bait? Well, the bait is something that you're familiar with. They're like, oh, you get an email and it's like, hey, we're TD Bank, and we're updating your account records. Click here to go and change whatever it is. And they're using official wording. It's the TD Bank logo will be there. Right. Sometimes to make it even official, they'll use name of a company CEO or someone that that and you trust. And essentially you will go and you'll go click on it and you don't think any different. And if you're not careful, you may not even notice that maybe it's not the address you're going to. It's not even TD Bank. It might be like TD Bank 52, right? A lot of people don't even look where they're going. And then you go and provide your password to that malicious website, which is not the real TD Bank site. And then you get phished. And so the difference between spear phishing and that is, phishing is typically when they send a million spam, right? Like they go buy a list, for not a lot of money. You can go, hey, I want a list of 5 million email addresses. And then you send this spam or this phishing email to these 5 million people. Now, there's a good chance that if you're hitting 5 million Canadians, I don't know what the statistics are, and I'm just going to pull something out of my hat, but let's say 15% of Canadians use TD Bank, right? And then if you buy an email list that's 5 million, well, let's do the math. We can do the math later. I can't do it right now, but figure out the percentage of what is 5 million people out of the population of Canada, and then multiply that. But there's a good chance, let's say 5% chance that those people, 5% of them will be TD customers, and they'll all open that email and they'll all be phished. So that's sort of a mass attack. You're not doing it directly on a particular person. But let's say you wanted to attack, Bob Johnson, that was the CEO of a particular company, and you were only interested in him. You're not interested in, just phishing 5 million people and see who picks the bait, right? What you want to do is you have a target, and you're specifically after this guy. So you will go and research him, figure out where he works and where he does business and what else he does, and then you spear phish him. And that means you're taking a spear and you're only targeting that guy instead of just throwing a net, trying to catch a bunch of people. So spear phishing is becoming pretty common, and so human. So going back to what we were saying, is human is the number one weakness in all these different situations, and commonly is through these type of phishing or spear phishing attacks.
So that happened to a friend of mine who's in my industry, the larger industry of coaching. It was a CEO scam, is what he called it. But somebody mimicked the way they got into his email, and they recreated one of his emails using his language and his style, and sent it off to his administrator, asking him to transfer funds. But at the same time, they turned something off on his computer, and he was traveling for work, as people like me often do. And since it was normal language and it was normal transactional discussion, she just transferred the money, and he lost something like 300 grand in a day.
Wow.
Pretty bad.
Yeah, there you go. That's a classic example of a CEO scam, right? And the whole scam is based around, like you said, using someone with power who's a CEO, and then if you send it to an employee, and if it's written in the same language, and you can go research that, like read a few other emails from that person or their writing style and try to write like them. And so if you can create, and you don't need his email address. Like I can use any email client to actually put any email address in the from field that I want. So a lot of people that I talk to, particularly people that are not super familiar with email or these technology, they think that you have to hack the password or have control of someone's email account to be able to send emails pretending that you're from them. But it's not true. You can, and I can put that I can send an email to Bob, and I can put it came from Dominic, and I can put your email address, and it'll work in most cases. A lot of service systems don't detect that the true origin, or a lot of these protocols don't support authenticating the source. Therefore, you can easily spoof someone else's identity and pretend that you're them. And let's pretend you're a CEO and send an email to an employee, and the employee will take direction. Something happened to me in a similar vein. You mentioned, you take an email and you write it like the other person. I had done some business with a local printing company, and it was for a conference that I organize. I'm part of a committee. We organize an annual security conference, and I'd ordered some bookmarks and other things to give away at the conference. And about a month after the conference, I get an email from the printing company, and it's actually a reply to a chain of emails that I'd had with the customer support representative at the printing company. But it was a month after the conference. I'd already paid for the printing, and the email was like, "Hey, this invoice is due," and there was an invoice attached. And I was just in the middle of doing a million different things, and I was like, "This looks legit." Email looked like it was conversation. I clicked to open the attachment, and then when the attachment opened, it was like an Excel spreadsheet, but then it asked me if I wanted to enable macros. And if that triggered me, I was like, oh, wait a minute, macros. Why does it want
Really?
macros? Typically, viruses through Excel travel through macros of Excel. So at that point, I stopped going any further. And then I replied to the direct email of that CSR. And I was like, hey, did you just send me this email? And he was like, nope, I did not send you that email. I was like, okay, I'm glad I didn't finish opening up this Excel spreadsheet, because I could have been, locked up in my computer. A million different bad things could have happened to my computer.
Yeah.
And they were targeting me because they had actually compromised his email account. So they had somehow managed to get a hold of his password, and by logging into his account, then they sent that email from his account. So he was doing something else while this guy's sending an email to me, I'm a security professional, and God knows what I have access to. So it's scary. It happens to all of us, and it happens all the time.
Well, the business coach in me can't help but think of a system that goes around this. So if somebody's listening is worried about a CEO scam happening, I suppose the simple fix, and Farshad, you can tell me if this is too simple or just right, but maybe set a dollar figure with your assistant, with your finance person, that says any transfers over X dollars, let's say $20,000, have to be verified in person or by phone with me. And then just set that number, and then your assistant, whoever that financial person is, also knows that they've got a let-off valve, so they have somebody to check with before they release funds, because that could happen so easily.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, social engineering gets really interesting. We could talk about it for hours. There's all kinds of scams that people will do. Like, just another quick example that came to mind is they'll call you and they're like, "Hey, I'm Shaw Cable, and you have automatic payments to us, and our account number has changed. So can you just log into your internet banking? Because if you have automated payments set up," and then you're like, "Okay, cool, sounds right." So you go and change it, and then your monthly payments that you're making automated through your banking, it's not going to Shaw's account, it's going to their account. And so there's all kinds of scams that through social. You just have to sound official, have the right.
Be confident.
Yeah.
These scams all existed before, Farshad.
I remember.
What's that?
I would get those letters in the mail asking me to send them something. Oh yeah, these things have been around.
Yeah. I think it used to be with printer paper or adding machine paper, toner cartridges.
Oh yeah, toner cartridges.
You just get an invoice for toner cartridges.
Yeah, I remember those in the 90s.
Old.
Yeah, totally.
So it's just happening now on computer. Hey, something interesting though. I mean, this client that I had who had the ransomware attack, there was some discussion about, is there insurance for that? Do you know if there's insurance for that occurrence happening in your company? Because I wouldn't know who to call. If I got a ransomware attack right now, God, I hope there's no hackers listening. I simply wouldn't know what to do next. I might be stuck. I mean, hopefully I'd know that this podcast existed and maybe.
Hopefully you listen.
You're not a common guy to find, and I know that. You and I know each other through some other avenues. You're a very rare breed of programmer who understands hacking from the other side. Mm-hmm. I know that was a big question. Is there insurance? How do we find guys like you to fix it? What do you do?
That's a good question, Dom. And I think the good news is that as of recently, I don't know as of how long ago, but definitely in the last year or so, maybe even longer, insurance companies are offering protection, cyber protection. Essentially, before in the past, you'd get your basic insurance, but now if you want protection, say for example, if all your files get locked, all your media get locked through CryptoLocker or ransomware, that they'll protect you against that, or either they'll pay for the recovery fee, or if they can't, the damage is resulted as that. Legal fees. So there's if you ask your insurance agency next time you're renewing your business insurance, to say I'd like to get media and legal, they'll add that in. Now, not every underwriter offers that, but I know the underwriter that I use, I can't remember who was, CFO or something like that. They offer that, and then they also offer a number of other things, like for example, if your network gets attacked, if you have an office network, there's if your intellectual property is lost, and all kinds of other things related to cyber attacks.
Right.
Some of them bundle in under cyber insurance, but the media and legal thing is a pretty standard term that a lot of them use. So I would recommend that the business owners consult with their insurance agent and ask for media, legal, or cyber insurance.
So then I suppose that's, if something does happen to me, you're saying the first person I should call then is my insurance. Obviously, if I have insurance, the first person I call is my insurance agent, because they'll know how to find people like you who are specialists in.
Well, I would say the first thing you should have done is backed up your data. So if you backed up your data, now that would be a concern, right? Don't even worry. But you know what? Let's be real. How many of us back up? Like, I didn't until a few years ago. Here I am, an IT guy and all this other stuff. And I can't remember. It was like at least 4 years ago. And the backup, I did have a backup system, but it had failed, and I was busy to fix it. And I was like, I'll fix it later. And then the night came that I was trying to fix it, and then the whole thing blew up and I lost all my data. And then now I back up religiously. I have backups everywhere, but it's much cheaper and much simpler and much less headache free. Just get yourself a cheap cloud account. There's all these people, iCloud, and there's so many different companies offering cheap cloud storage.
Right.
And just store it away in the cloud. If you have security concern, do a bit of research. Some of the cloud providers offer protection in terms of keeping your data confidential and encrypted. Some of them don't. So just do a bit of research, but none of that is going to cost you, more than say $10 a month or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's a way better. And if that fails, then you can call your insurance company. So I'd say do that second. But
yeah, I mean, it would be nice if I got attacked by ransomware to be able to say to the ransomware company, "Yeah, do your worst. I've got it all backed up, and I just did it yesterday. We've effectively lost nothing, or maybe a couple hours worth of data, which you'd hope is retrievable."
Exactly.
I'm afraid now that I'm doing this episode, because I think if there's a hacker out there, he's going to target me just to prove a point.
You have backup, so you have everything. So
I have everything backed up. Yeah, I'm an impenetrable wall, like on Game of Thrones. I'm the ice wall.
Exactly.
Can't get through. All right. So that covers off scams, hacking, and then this is a trend I've seen on websites lately, and many of our listeners, they do a lot of business with their websites for different reasons. But this banner has started showing up that says this site uses cookies.
Oh yeah.
And accept that. I think before I continue using the site, what's that? Am I allowing something extra? What's going on with that?
Yeah, so that's all as a result of GDPR. And for those who are not familiar with what GDPR is, it stands for General Data Protection Regulation. Essentially, it was a regulation that was it's part of EU law right now. It was
European Union.
Yeah, it's part of the European Union. It applies to the European Union as well as the European Economic Area, which is the extended part of the European Union, as they call EEA. And I guess in summary, what it requires organizations to do is that if you're handling data of a EU individual, it doesn't have to be a citizen, it could be a resident, you have to protect their data, and and the protection is vague. It doesn't go into like a lot of detail, but essentially the idea is to put appropriate measures so that you're implementing the data protection principles so that their data doesn't leak, that they can delete it at will, that the users know what data you have on them. And so now a lot of people have been asking, I'm an American company, I'm a Canadian company, does that apply to me? If you're not processing data that belongs to anyone that resides in you, then that it doesn't apply. So let's say if you're a Vancouver company dealing with BC customers, well, then that's it. All your customers are in BC, right? But if you're a company in Vancouver, but have a couple people in Spain or in England that are using your services or your product, and you have data on them, then you're required to be protecting their data. And then there's a whole bunch of dimensions to that protection. So the cookie thing. Oh, so yeah, your original question was the cookie thing. So the cookie thing is because of that. So if you don't inform those people that you're tracking them, you're keeping some of their data and all that other stuff, then you're going to be breaking that law. So those websites are warning you. They're like, hey, click here to agree that we're going to put a cookie, we're going to track you, we might be keeping some data on you and all that other stuff. So and most of us just click yes because there's no other option. It's either click that or don't use that website, essentially.
Yeah. So, what just occurred to me, Farshad, is, the people that listen to the show are very good technically at what they do, but the internet or their website is just something that sits off to the side. And so because that's the case, they might not understand what a cookie is. Can you just give us just a 2-second overview of what's a cookie? Because I think some people might be shaking their heads right now.
Absolutely. Cookie. Yeah, it's not the stuff that you eat. But I think the name came from, like, computer people love to use like names that have some sort of relationship to something funny in the real world or whatever. But I think it's like the idea is that, when you eat a cookie, you just kind of leave a bunch of crumbs and stuff along the way. So these are like your traces. Like basically, essentially what happens is when a website is leaving a cookie, they're leaving something in your browser, and it could be a number of things. It could be that like your name. It could be the account number that you used on that website. So if you're logged into a site, let's say your internet banking site or some website that you're Amazon, for example, right? They may leave a bunch of stuff in your browser that they can read later on to identify activities that you performed on their site, right? So then it's like, oh, I left a cookie that says, hey, you were doing X, Y, Z on this particular site. And now if you're not logged in, they can still leave a cookie, but they don't know anything about you, right? Because if you're not authenticated and logged in, how do they know who you are? They don't, but they can still put a cookie. And then what they can do is they can at least say, well, I don't know who Dominic is, but but they know your computer's address. They know a bunch of other things from your computer because you contacted their website, right? Yes. So they can create a signature that identifies that endpoint, right? They don't know it's Dominic, but they know it was his computer from this IP address from home and all that other stuff. And then next time you go visit them, then they can use that information. Some of them, these sort of ad networks, they leave different cookies depending on the sites you go to, and then they can look and see your pattern of activity. Oh, for example, you were, you visited this furniture store, right? And then, that furniture store, let's say, their website has a deal with an ad company. So they leave a cookie in your browser, and then when you go to Facebook, Facebook has a deal with the same ad company, and then they can look and see, oh, hey, that cookie gets passed to the ad agency, and then that agency goes, oh, hey, this guy, I don't know who he is. Oh, but he was looking at sofas based on your signature, and then they can correlate that with the person you are on Facebook, and then they can push an ad about furniture to your Facebook profile. So they can use cookies.
That's how that happens on Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. They can use it to track you. That's one thing that people don't like, and I think that GDPR says you can't use cookies for tracking. And then, but the biggest thing is that they could put some personal information in there and make a deduction about who you are and your behavior, which I think is another point of contention. So that's why they're warning you that, hey, like, we're going to leave these cookies and they'll track you and they'll identify you, do all these things. Do you agree? And if you say no, well, you can't really use their website because most of the functions depend on that cookie being present. So most of us, although they're telling us, it's not like we have much choice. So it's kind of like we're telling you, but you don't have a lot of choice.
You don't have a choice if you want to look at this website. Well, remember how I started this podcast? I said we're going to talk about scary stuff. You've just made it scarier. That's all you've done.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because there's tools. Up to a few years ago, there are tools you can get for your browser that block cookies. I have friends that were super concerned. I'm not as concerned, but I had friends that were, and then there's all these cookie blockers and all this stuff. But it makes the sites useless. Like nowadays, the modern website and web application is designed to heavily depend on cookies. So it's basically there's no point in doing that, like going and installing all this cookie blockers and ad blockers and all that stuff, because then all of a sudden sites become non-functional and you're not getting the benefit from them. So you either use the internet or you don't. And if you're using it, just know that they're going to know stuff about you, basically.
Listen, for my listeners, you either make cabinets or you staple cardboard boxes to the wall. What do you want to have for? Yeah.
Yeah, people are really concerned. You can use private browsing. Private browsing, what it does is after the, I'm sure you've seen it in your, I don't know what browser that you use. There's like Safari and Firefox.
I'm not going to say now because a hacker could be listening and then they're going to come in through that. So I'm not telling
you. You're smart. That's good. The less information, that's actually really smart, because if you tell them what you use, you're absolutely right. They'll come and totally target you. But yeah, whatever browser you use, all modern browsers these days, they have this private browsing mode. And private browsing, you can still put cookies, but when the session's done, all that stuff is deleted from your computer. So it sort of minimizes the damage. So that's what I would recommend that people do. Their sensitive, if you're doing banking or whatever, or anything, visiting that may be sensitive, do that in the private browsing session, but just know that nothing is going to be remembered after you're done with that session.
So you have to know all the keywords or the passwords again by hand.
You have to know everything. It's a sandbox, and it's a jailed session, and when you're done with it, it all zaps away, essentially. And another good practice is to have two different browsers. So let's say you have like in a Mac, you have Safari, right? And then you also have Firefox, for example. Do your banking and all that sensitive stuff in one, and then all your other activity in the other. Because, on a personal level, you might look at some weird website. Who knows what people are, do want to look at some sites that may not be so secure. And that's fine to do, when you're bored, you want to go watch a funny movie, and that's in some website that you got to go to, that's fine. Do that in a separate browser. And then your banking and all that, do it in another one, so that if those malicious websites leave some bad cookies or do something to you, that's all self-contained. That's not going to be able to impact your other data that you were processing with banking or whatever.
Interesting. Okay, these are very interesting tools you're talking about here to stop cross-contamination. So
yeah, exactly.
All right, so I'm going to have a fun browser. I'm going to have a work browser.
Exactly.
Fantasy Football League browser,
all the private browsing tab for
yeah. Farshad, you've given us a lot of information today, and I think for a lot of us listening, we never want to contact you first. Don't be offended. But if somebody does need to talk to you about a security issue or a question they have about their internet security or the cloud or some of these scams and hacking things that have happened, knowing that you're a serious banking professional and you've been doing this for a long time, how does somebody reach you for questions?
Company has a pretty easy name to remember. It's called Forward Security, and you can't get it wrong. So just look up forwardsecurity.com and you'll find us. There's contact information on there. There's overview of the services. We don't deal with a lot of the incident response type services like ransomware and all that. Again, as I recommended, it's best to have backups and then have insurance. That's probably the best way to deal with it. But in terms of services to assess the risk that you may be facing, and then helping you, making some recommendations in terms of what you can do to secure your organization, especially if you have data on customers that may be sensitive and all that kind of stuff, and you're concerned about, or maybe you're handling transactions yourself, taking payments and wanting to make sure that's all secure. We can definitely help you provide review all your how things are set up, make a recommendation, and all that sort of good stuff.
Yeah, and we do have lots of people who do that. We've got people who are dealers for certain cabinet lines, and they're taking payments online. There's custom furniture people that do Murphy beds and things like that. They take payments online. Gaming tables, they all, more and more people are getting into lines of business, and we don't recognize the risks that are sometimes out there. It's the reason I asked you on here today, is not because this is a burning issue, but because when it is a burning issue, I want at least people to know that they heard about this before, and there's maybe we're leaving a mental cookie for them.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay? Maybe that's what we did. Leave a mental cookie.
That's it. Yeah.
Hey, Farshad, thank you so much for running this. People who don't know, Farshad is a recognized industry expert. He's what's known as a thought leader in his industry. He holds a number of very serious and high-level events in his own specific and weird industry. I say that with all the love in my heart. But you're in the industry, you're recognized and well known for this stuff. So thank you for joining us here today and giving a sense of hacking and scams and everything that we need to be aware of. So appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. No, that's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I hope people got value out of this discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Farshad. Have a great day.
Cheers. You too. Take care. Bye-bye.